On July 15, 2006, around 12:05 p.m., Lisebergbanan was operating normally. Train 2 was loaded full of riders and dispatched from the station. As it began to climb the lift hill, Train 5 pulled into the station and its lap bars opened. As riders started to exit the train, Train 2 suddenly came crashing down the lift hill and into train number 5, sending riders flying and giving other riders a hard jolt. The ride was closed for investigation. The investigation would be led by the Swedish Accident Investigation Board. They would examine every aspect of the accident, including the direct cause of the accident and expanding to the design of the ride itself, the maintenance practices in place at Liseberg, and the operations of the ride. The investigators first looked at the ride itself to determine the direct cause of the accident. They could see that the lift chain that had been hauling Train 2 up the lift hill had snapped. Usually an anti-rollback system would engage that consisted of a ratcheting device engaging with a trough in the track to prevent the train from rolling backwards. Obviously, this did not occur and Train 2 ended up crashing into Train 5 in the station. From witness reports as well as an assessment of damage to the back of Train 2 and the front of Train 5, it was determined that the chain had snapped when the train was approximately 1/3 of the way up the lift hill. The investigators then looked at the anti-rollback dogs. These were designed to engage with a trough in the middle of the track underneath the lift chain. They would allow the train to move forward but would prevent it from moving backwards by being wedged into the trough. This requires friction, so when the investigators were expecting to find anti-rollback dogs that looked like this, they were shocked to find ones that looked like this. The anti-rollback dogs had been covered with a plastic device. Obviously, the plastic had interfered with the anti-rollback system and prevented it from working as designed. With the investigators now working with the idea that the anti-rollback dogs had been modified, causing them to fail, their attention now turned to why this was done and why this issue had just occurred, even though the ride had been open since 1987. The investigation turned to the ride's history. Lisebergbanan was different than other roller coasters designed at the time. It used an anti-rollback system mounted underneath the lift chain and using 2 anti-rollback dogs at one time. This had been done to reduce noise, but it was found in 1988 that this was not sufficient and the ride was still too loud. Liseberg worked with the ride's manufacturer to quiet the ride. This was done by changing the brake design on the ride and adding a plastic cover to the anti-rollbacks. The concept of the new anti-rollback dog design was that the rollbacks would slide silently along the rollback trough when the train was moving forwards, but when the train would start to move back, they would be forced into the grooves and stop the train. This design was installed for the 1988 season and worked in several tests on the track and in a workshop over the years. The ride would be subject to government inspections yearly and park inspections daily, with no deficiencies in the anti-rollback dogs being noticed. The investigators looked at the ride's official manual for guidelines on inspecting the ride. They found that there were no procedures for testing the anti-rollback system in the manual. However, Liseberg had added a procedure to test them every morning before the trains were added to the track. Though this procedure was vague and open to a lot of interpretation, the investigators also found that the manual from the ride's manufacturer had procedures for inspecting the ride's lift chain, instructing that 10 out of the 20 lift chain segment screws were to be selected at random every morning and then checked for tightness. If any looseness was noticed, all 20 segments would have to have their screws tightened to the proper amount. This procedure was not being followed by the park, as it was found that Liseberg had no procedures in place for the daily inspection of the chain. Finally, they found the manual to be somewhat confusing, with some procedures making no sense. This was attributed to the ride's original manual being translated from German to Swedish back when the ride was installed. With the apparent lack of inspection of the lift chain, the investigators took a closer look at the lift chain to see if there were any obvious signs of neglect. They looked at the screw which had failed and noticed scraping on the head of the screw. This would only be possible if the screw was loose. With the screw loose, excess lateral force was applied to it as the chain moved, causing the screw to break in half, resulting in total chain failure. They also examined the other screw sections on the lift chain and found 4 other screws to be loose. They also looked at the original design drawings for the plastic modification to the anti-rollbacks. They noticed that the ride's manufacturer had used a constant for the coefficient of friction in their calculations, meaning they assumed this force would always be the same. The investigators measured the actual value using anti-rollback dogs involved in the accident. In the 3 weeks leading up to the accident, it had been unusually dry and sunny. They found that under these conditions, the dried out plastic on the rollback dogs had a very low friction coefficient, so low that the design could not be guaranteed to work as intended. With this uncovered, we can reconstruct everything that contributed to the accident. Lisebergbanan was built by Schwarzkopf and opened in 1987. The next year, it was determined that the ride was too loud for the surrounding area. Liseberg and Schwarzkopf worked together to quiet the ride by installing redesigned brakes and adding plastic covers to the anti-rollback dogs on each of the trains. The ride would operate like this until July 15, 2006. Around 12:05 p.m., Lisebergbanan was operating normally. The past 3 weeks had been unusually dry and sunny. That day it was very busy at Liseberg and the ride was running with all 5 trains. Train 2 was loaded with riders and dispatched out of the station. Train 5 pulled into the station and its lap bars were opened. Riders began to exit. Meanwhile, Train 2 was about 1/3 of the way up the lift hill when a loose screw connecting a section of the lift chain broke due to a shearing force. This broke the chain and Train 2 stopped moving forwards. The anti-rollback dogs under the train failed to engage due to a lack of friction. As soon as the chain snapped, the operator e-stopped the ride, but with no chain there was no way to stop the train. Train 2 fell down the lift hill and collided with Train 5. The resulting crash injured 17 riders in Train 5 and 4 from Train 2. It would also damage both Train 2 and 5, as well as the chain trough and the ride's track near the base of the lift hill. All riders would make a full recovery. The investigation exposed oversights in the ride's design and maintenance. The failure of the ride's designer to account for different levels of friction caused by changing conditions would be the ultimate cause of the accident. The failure of Liseberg to properly inspect the ride's chain was mostly attributed to poor translation of the ride's manual from German to Swedish. Additionally, the ride's manufacturer had failed to provide any guidance on the inspection of the anti-rollback devices on the ride, leaving Liseberg to create their own inspection that failed to detect the design flaw built into the ride. After the accident, Liseberg would introduce a comprehensive program for chain inspection and non-destructive testing. They would also remove the plastic coverings on the anti-rollback dogs. Liseberg would also implement a program for checking the anti-rollback device function. Finally, they would introduce a new program across the park that strengthened ride inspections in 2007 as a result of this accident. Lisebergbanan would have trains 2 and 5 repaired and put back into service along with the rest of the ride. Today, Liseberg remains one of the safest parks in Europe and has not had any notable accidents since, and Lisebergbanan has become a beloved classic attraction. Thanks for watching this episode of What Really Happened. This episode was created with an accident report sent to me by a fan. Without accident reports, I simply cannot make these videos, as going off news stories and online discussions is simply too inaccurate. And unlike a lot of other channels that cover these accidents, I'm not content with just repeating the lines said in the news over and over. So if you have an accident report for a ride accident I've not yet covered on this channel, or you know where to find one, please email me at coaster.college@gmail.com. As always, the accident report can be found in the description if you'd like to learn more. Finally, I know I don't usually ask for this, but if you enjoy videos like this, please like and subscribe so this video can fare better against the YouTube algorithm and I can keep doing these videos for years to come. Thanks for watching and see you next time.